Diving into our second conversation for today, we're joined with professional counselor Christa Courtney. Good morning. As we have a conversation about mental health, and this time we're diving into the conversation looking at social anxiety. Good morning, Christa.
Good morning. Thanks again for having me.
Okay, let's step back and talk a bit about anxiety. And I really wanted to start off by looking at one of the issues, which is the prevalence that seems to be, it seems like everyone is talking about anxiety, everyone feels they have anxiety. What's the real picture here?
I will say that it may be that there is an increase in the number of people who are experiencing what they would consider to be anxiety.
Yeah.
Anxiety is a very normal emotion, actually. In certain situations, you have a little more fear response than in others. It's part of what alerts your system to pay attention to unfamiliar territory. So anxiety is, in some ways, as a normal emotion, it is useful in some areas. When people say I have anxiety, it's because they're feeling a fear response in more situations than we consider to be normal. So carrying out your normal everyday activities, if you're feeling intense fear, discomfort, your body is energized as if it needs to fight something or run away, that's not normal to feel on a daily basis. And so interacting with people can heighten that sense of anxiety. And so when it becomes a situation where interacting with people that I'm unfamiliar with or in crowds, certain settings, starts to interfere with how I make my choices, what events I go to, what I don't, I start to sort of shrink my world, then we look at perhaps a diagnosis of social anxiety.
So what you're saying is there's a certain amount of anxiety for just about anything. But then there's that marker where you say, okay, now it's starting to make my life more difficult rather than helping it. And that would be a good point to say, okay, maybe I have an issue with this.
Yeah, and for mental health, that's pretty much one of the things that we look for in any mental health diagnosis. Is it interfering with your daily activities, right? If any emotion that you're feeling is strong enough to interfere with your daily activity, then we need to maybe examine it a little bit more and see if you need help.
Is it a situation where social anxiety is more prevalent among young people these days as opposed to perhaps older folks? Are there any particular trends you're noticing in terms of people accessing service or coming to you for counseling?
Right. We see all ages, and it happens at all stages because there are so many different things that contribute to social anxiety in particular. What we're seeing is a much higher instance of trauma in our societies. Not only trauma that happens to me, but secondary trauma. Watching mass shootings or watching someone get killed or robberies in our area. We're much closer to it than we used to be on a more frequent basis. And so things like that over time, sort of stressful events, really stressful events, not just daily stress, can increase the instances that we see of people who are now more afraid in certain settings.
Would you say that, I heard this so much in September, and so you said it and it triggered a thought. People said, I'm not going out to watch Carnival, or I'm not going to that mass public event because have you seen the news? Do you know what's happening? Here that starts to happen, that people no longer want to do the activities they love. So I think looking at the situation of crime in this country, whether you perceive it at the reality that it is or even, at a bigger scale, that can also have an impact on why people would want to or not want to interact.
Yeah, but there's a very fine line sometimes, and for the average person, right? It would be maybe, okay, I just feel a lot safer not going in that big crowd. Versus, I can't go in that big crowd because my body will react and I can't function. So I can't breathe, I get nauseous, my heart rate is too high, I'm afraid. That is really disruptive. So it's more than just general fear of crime and other situations that we're familiar with. When we talk about social anxiety, we're really talking about a huge disruption.
So you're saying your body will physically react.
That's what anxiety is. If you think about any emotion, it is felt. If you ask someone, where do you feel it? well, my head gets tight, the back of my neck gets tense, you know, I have a pain in my stomach, or my chest gets tight, or I feel like I have a knot, I can't breathe. Emotions is exactly that. It's a physiological experience of something that our brain is telling us. And it can be positive, it can be negative. It's not really good or bad necessarily. It's what's working for someone and then what generally is not working for them.
So looking at social anxiety, you know, where does it, you said that sometimes it comes from trauma, but is it something that you can just develop? Like there's just an onset of social anxiety, or is it something that builds, or there had to have been an event that took place?
Okay. Social anxiety specifically, just like anxiety or depression or any other, you know, heart condition or high cholesterol, if there's a family history, you may be more at risk of developing symptoms like that. But that's when we're talking about more of a chemical imbalance that produces something like depression or anxiety.
Okay.
Social anxiety can develop from adverse stressful experiences. We see one of the experiences that sort of has a predictive value, doesn't necessarily predict it, but it is very common in people who have experienced both physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. And so having a history of abuse increases the likelihood of developing a variety of different mental illnesses, but anxiety in particular. Because if you think about it, abuse in any form, right, is a violation.
Yeah.
It's where someone pushes in on me in some way that is undesired. My body reacts because it feels fear of whatever's happening to me. And so in most instances, it is a traumatic experience because I am perceived to be threatened.
Yeah.
Whether it turns out to be real or not is completely and oftentimes irrelevant. It can increase the level of mental illness if the attack actually happened, but even just being in an abusive home, you don't know when you're next. You don't know, I mean, someone you love is being hurt in front of you. And so things like that tend to have some predictive value in contributing to social anxiety. The other thing to consider, and this is a little interesting, a little different from such a heavy focus on trauma, someone who, for instance, has some type of a medical condition, you know, maybe they have seizures. There can be an intense fear of going into a public setting and having a seizure in public and being completely embarrassed or judged by other people. Sometimes having Parkinson's and there's a tremor, there's something visible that people can see. I'm now a little more heightened in my fear of being judged or assessed by the people that I'll be in contact with.
I'd imagine self-esteem issues too.
It can lead to self-esteem issues, or you can have self-esteem issues that contribute to then feeling, again, judged and evaluated by strangers.
But that is what you tell yourself, but not necessarily what other people might be thinking or saying when
Well, that brings me to, thank you so much. One of the points that I really wanted to make is that we see our world, our environment, oftentimes and most times very much based on who we are, not who you are. So I'm not looking at you based on, you know, who you are, your set of circumstances separate from me. I'm seeing based on me. So that's why if I'm pregnant, all of a sudden I see everybody's pregnant. If I buy a certain car, now I see that car everywhere. It's not that the instances of that vehicle in the country have increased. It's that now it's in my purview, and so we tend to see based on our own experiences. But think about it. In a very primitive brain, before we developed all the things that we have now, fear of the unknown is what humans are most threatened by. Right? If I don't know, then I can't assess the level of threat to me because there is an innate will to survive. And so anything different from me, anything that I'm not familiar with, anything that sounds weird, you know, we tend to be more afraid of, and we tend to like, real skeptical, you know, and then when we have lower instances of emotional intelligence, it can really get ignorant with how we express that to each other. So even in a social setting where I might go to hug somebody and they're very stiff, you know, what's wrong with her? You know, why is she going like that? Because we're a huggy society. We
Yeah.
hug and we kiss. That's how we greet each other.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong, but if you notice that someone reacts to you a particular way, it's far safer to assume
Yeah.
that maybe they're uncomfortable with that, not
Yeah.
that I did something wrong or
Yeah.
that, they feel a certain way towards me.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. In terms of persons who may be challenged with social anxiety or any other form of anxiety issues, do they readily come forward to seek counseling? Or is it something that, for the most part, they keep it to themselves and it's all bottled in?
Isani, what I see a lot, if I have anxiety, it's really difficult to reach out, and worse to a stranger,
Yeah.
right? And just like a doctor, you really do have to develop a healthy relationship with your therapist. So even if you seek therapy and you don't connect with your therapist, it's quite okay to disengage and look for somebody else.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people don't realize that. They think once they meet with a counselor, if they don't connect, oh, that didn't work, and then they never go back. And in our society, that happens far more often. And so I really would encourage people that, there's the Mind Health Connect website where you can find out a little bit more about your therapist before you engage, which might help you to feel a little more comfortable, because generally in an anxious position, getting information can be helpful, right? Because it's the unknown a lot of times that has us really scared.
Yeah.
But anxiety is much more complicated than just afraid to talk to someone.
Yeah.
I mean, it's much more disruptive. It's a constant battle with thoughts, with opinions of others, with my self-image, and it can be really, really challenging to fight that negative feedback loop.
Yeah, and people who struggle with anxiety talk about being debilitated. Like they're just stuck. They can't move. I mean, I have thought so far ahead as to what can possibly go wrong. I just don't do.
Yeah.
Or don't react or don't say.
And people will say things like, well, just don't think about it. And you just want to punch them in their face
Yeah.
because it's like,
can't
you
not
don't
think
get it.
about yeah.
And it doesn't mean that what I'm doing is right. It doesn't mean that those thoughts are helpful. We know they're not,
It's just
as a person who suffers.
Yeah.
But it is way more difficult than just willpower.
And this is where there are mixed messages in the world right now. Because we have a lot of empowering messages about, the law of attraction and controlling your thoughts and being aware of what you let into your mind. And so oftentimes if I take messages like that, it helps me. But if I encounter someone with anxiety, I'm going to use those tools for them. And it's probably one of the worst things, like, oh, you are the keeper of your mind. Don't let those negative thoughts get in there. And they literally have no control over it.
Right. And the difficulty there is, unless you know this person really well and know that they struggle with anxiety, people are really good at hiding it. It takes a hell of a lot of energy to put on that face every day, but a lot of people do. And so you may not know. And that's the other thing that sort of keeps the disease sort of active. That negative feedback loop is that I have to hide this. It's not acceptable. It's not okay. People are going to say insensitive things to me and I just don't want to deal with it, and I don't want anybody to know. We're embarrassed by it. And so you may not know. It's not that you're wrong for offering whatever positive energy you have.
Well intentioned,
Right, but for the sufferer, I would say and encourage you that, there are diet plans. You can go look up keto. You can go look up workout plans. You can go through P90X or whichever one you want. But oftentimes, the specific result that a person is trying to reach requires personal training. It requires a tailored program to fit your set of circumstances. And that's essentially what therapy is. It's not only for crazy people. I mean, a lot of the people that I see, for instance, don't even qualify for a diagnosable illness. But
it's never for crazy people. It's what we tell ourselves when we're in denial of needing to seek
it is
the
again
service.
a symptom of our being uncomfortable with things that we don't know. And so for a sufferer, seeking a therapist is picking a personal trainer. Someone to help you work through, identify, and map out your specific set of circumstances, perhaps what are the contributing factors, and then what coping skills fit you and what works for you, because not everything works for everyone.
I guess because I'm extroverted by nature, I've never seen counseling as something that's only for someone who's afflicted with an issue. It's a vehicle or a medium to be able to express whatever it is that's bothering you or whatever it is that you're thinking about. And it's interesting because most people, for whatever reason, figure, well, I'll only seek out a counselor or a therapist because something is mentally, something is in my mind that's not sitting well or what have you. And that's how they look at it. They don't look at it as, well, it's an opportunity for me to sit with someone who's able to either relate or understand enough to be able to share certain advice as to how to address a situation.
And as an extrovert, that thought process comes quite naturally. But for someone who's not as comfortable in a variety of unfamiliar settings and feel more confident with how to navigate, that can be really difficult. In fact, when we talk about people suffering in silence, many times people come in and they'll tell me their story. And they said, I just thought this is the normal ups and downs that everybody experiences. And I'm like, no. Like what you're describing to me, you should not have to carry on your own. Like, I'm so glad you're here and we work on it together. Because a lot of people just really do not know that what they're going through is extreme. Because if you think about it, we're with ourselves all the time. And if this is something that I've been struggling with for a really long time, it feels so normal. Your normal is kind of reset, right? So then to reach out and get help, sometimes life really has to become disruptive.
And I also want to be clear because you said it earlier that people mask anxiety or mental health issues they may be having in different ways. And someone can be really extroverted and happy looking and bubbly and, confident, but they could be masking a whole lot of pain, including anxiety and doing the very same things you know them for.
Right.
So I think being able to help people to recognize what patterns they may have developed or what they're feeling, to know that, okay, I can perhaps get some help to deal with this. You mentioned physical disruptions, like, feeling sick but what about some of the behavioral stuff, like the agitation and, like some people get really nasty. It's like, you have to go to the party and suddenly you're having blow-ups before you head out, when it may be because you're just scared to go, or you thought out what's the worst that can happen. Are those also signs of perhaps having too much anxiety about interacting with people?
It can be. It can be. Specific to social anxiety, if we just, because we could go off on a lot of tangents. Specific to social anxiety, though, it's sort of a fear of being in unfamiliar territory with people that I don't know, sometimes a crowd, if I have to make small talk, if I have to make eye contact. Those things then present your body with significant fear response. And so if you are someone who, has a complete meltdown internally, even if you don't show it externally, before going into a Christmas party, for instance, or a family gathering, even with people that you're familiar with, sometimes that social anxiety can really be there. So sometimes people overdrink to try and calm that system down, or they might, smoke a little marijuana before they go. They do different things to try to control the symptoms. But if you are someone who in most social settings has to take extreme measures to get through it, more than likely there may be a social anxiety issue there that's worth exploring.
So what would you say to people? I mean, I think that there are a lot of people at home who hear this talk about anxiety, and because you said it's such a natural reaction that we have. You put something, or you give somebody a challenge that they've never done before. There's a certain feeling that you get inside. Can I do it? Can I not do it? Like, am I sure? But where all of us have it, some people have it to a different level. So how do we know when we've crossed that boundary?
I think what we look for, again, is interruption of daily activities. So if there are more days than not that you feel that it's a struggle to get out of bed, to function, we look at how well someone is caring for themselves. Sometimes they start to let things go, like not comb their hair, or you see them not really taking care of themselves the same way that they used to. So there's a change. If that's how you always look, then. But we're looking for changes in behavior. So we look at appetite changes. If you're starting to eat more than you normally do or eat less than you normally do. We're looking for sleep disturbances. We're looking for any major shift in how you approach your day. Your interaction with friends and family. Sometimes people start to isolate. And it's one thing, it's very tricky, right? Because it's one thing to isolate to sort of recover. Sometimes I need time alone in order to recoup. So maybe I'm an introvert, right? And I don't necessarily have social anxiety, but I hate social situations. I'm not afraid of them, but I really dislike them. They take a lot of energy. When you talk about being introverted or extroverted, that really is speaking to how you are energized. So extroverts are generally energized by social settings.
Pumped up going.
Introverts are energized by time alone, right? So there's a lot of different contributing factors, but we look for disruptions of daily activities and interruptions, not being able to maintain relationships with friends and family, significant others, sometimes your children, etc. So if you're seeing that, it's worth talking to somebody just to figure out what's going on.
And I mean, in terms of being able to help them with the situation, what are some of the things that one can expect if they seek out a counselor? What's going to change for them?
So when you come into counseling, you are essentially in the beginning developing a relationship with your therapist. Because one of the things that's important is to make sure that you feel comfortable, that your information isn't going anywhere, that it's going to be kept confidential, that someone handles you professionally, meets you on time. There are certain protocols in the beginning of the session where we let people know what the limits to our confidentiality are, what situations we have to sort of reach out to someone. And then basically it's a getting to know you process. But therapists are trained to identify patterns. We'll never be the expert on anyone's life. I mean, all of the tiny little nuances that are connected to big things, that are connected to last year, that are connected to when my grandma died. I mean, there's so many different connections that we'll never be the expert on, but we are the expert on patterns and how certain types of events can display behaviors and be connected to behaviors you're experiencing now. And so going through all of that helps us to then identify what coping strategies might help. We educate a lot because a lot of people have experiences that they, apart from what they went through, they really do not know anything else about it and what that does to you or the effect that it has on your body. So it's like learning, that certain types of Diet Coke still has sugar and can still take up your diabetes. I mean, anyone who has diabetes then has to go through a process of learning about how their body processes different types of foods and their particular type of diabetes. So similarly with health issues, with mental health issues, there's anxiety, but there's you and anxiety, your life and anxiety. And so a therapist really is supposed to help you to understand your specific set of circumstances, what your contributing factors are, and help you to find out where you have the opportunity to make changes and where we need to cope with things that we can't change.
That's a constant process of learning, right?
It is.
Because if you see yourself in a particular situation where you're dealing with anxiety, you're learning certain things about yourself as you go along in terms of being able to effectively address those issues when you're in that situation.
Yes.
I believe it's something that, you take it on a day-to-day basis, so to speak. Is that?
Well, kind of. I mean, there are patterns, like you say. And so it's important to kind of figure out what my patterns are. And it's amazing because as much as I figure that I'm the expert on me, there are a lot of things that are hidden to me because I am just so accustomed to it. I don't even notice it. I mean, how many times have you been told, oh, you always do that? And it's like, no, I don't. It's like, yes, you do. And then next time you do it, it's like, oh my gosh, I do. So there are
people see you.
Because like what people notice is different from what you're so accustomed to being with yourself that sometimes you don't recognize what's happening until it becomes visible to someone else. And at that point, just like, when you have pain, that means that there's a problem that might have been there for a while. But when it gets to the point of pain, now our body is letting us know that we need to do something about it and we need to address it.
So we really wanted to have this conversation now because we imagine for people with social anxiety, with all the Christmas functions coming up, family gatherings, it's probably a really, really hard time for them. And I think the key part is that people don't have to struggle. They can get help to really get them through what they're struggling with. Talk to us about where people can go to access help.
Okay. The season is upon us.
Yeah.
So highly likely not much of what we'd be able to achieve is going to save people for December 2019. But if it opens the conversation and you begin to pay attention to how you feel and you want to begin to address it, you can go to Mind Health Connect, the website. And they're a new organization that has put together a website of all of the mental health and wellness resources that we've been able to find in the country so far. And so there is a good comprehensive list. I think we don't have enough practitioners to really meet the demand, but we're doing all that we can and we'll continue to expand it. But you can check out www.mindhealthconnect.bz, I believe. And you can find out both private practitioners who are available and public places, the rehabilitation centers and all the districts that the government provides free counseling as well.
If you go to the clinic, you can ask to see the psychiatric nurse practitioner, and that's free. So if cost is an issue, then you definitely have access there. And I know you guys are on Facebook too, so that's always easy to direct people.
Definitely.
But Christa, thank you for coming in and kind of shedding some light on social anxiety, helping us to understand what it looks like, what it may look like, but more importantly, helping us to understand what people may be feeling. And that's an important knowledge that we all have to acquire. So thank you.
Yes, my pleasure. Thank you.
We are going to go ahead and take a break, and I'll tell you what I'm feeling right now. A little bit hungry. So we have black fruit cake that we're going to be making in the next segment, so you don't want to miss it. Stay tuned.